Well, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to Public Health's virtual education series, Wažookį, Family Conversations. I'm Renelle, public health nurse, joined by Jamie, public health worker supervisor, who will help me moderate today's session. The goal of the series is to gather, learn, and share about Ho-Chunk culture, resources, services, and the connection to health. In public health, we focus on prevention, promotion, and the protection of the health and well-being of our communities. Health and well-being are rooted in many aspects of our lives, from our physical body, our mental health, our spirit, and the environment we live in, and much more. During these sessions, we will explore topics that can impact our health and well-being. Together, we will learn about tools and resources to improve our health and the health of our communities. Today, we're happy to have Pam Thunder with us to talk about climate change. We'll have about 45 minutes for Pam's presentation, followed by a Q&A. Please use the chat function to enter any comments or questions for our presenter. Jamie and I will monitor the chat throughout the presentation and read the questions at the end for Pam. You can also raise your hand and come off of mute during the Q&A to ask your questions out loud. If there are any questions that we don't have time for, we will email to our presenter and then email those responses back to the group. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Department of Health website in the Public Health Division tab and on our Facebook page. Everyone, please welcome Pam Thunder.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for having me. I am going to try to share my slide deck here. See how I do. Okay, hold on. Share my PowerPoint. Okay. Can you guys see?
Perfect.
All right, awesome, great. Well, thank you again for having me. And I love the introduction and kind of the whole goal. Climate change as a topic seems to fit like perfectly into that goal. And it's really an area where in the environmental health program, we were thinking, well, what can we do? And then when we started having some internal conversations, like, oh, we already do this. So I'm hoping to share a little bit about that and then just give a little background information as well. But I'll introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Pam Thunder. I am an environmental health program manager in the environmental health division. I have been in this position in environmental health for about 21 years. Kind of do a lot of different types of programming. Our main focus is on food establishments and doing inspections related to food establishments. So currently we have things like Head Starts, daycares, federal aging units, the casinos, C-stores, anything kind of related to food, pools, hotels, those kinds of things. We also have an injury prevention program within our program that touches on a lot of different things and climate. So there's a lot of different work that happens in environmental health. There we go. Okay. So just some goals today I have are learn a little bit about climate change and how it's related to our health. It seems like a really big topic and a really big, broad area that we could cover. So I'm going to try to just do a brief overview and get a little background and then talk about why it matters in general and why it matters to health specifically and things that impact us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the big we and the little we. So what can we as a broader community do to protect our health related to climate change and reduce climate change impacts? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the little we. So what can we individually do in our everyday lives? And then at the end, I have a couple of resources that I'd like to talk about for if you want to talk with kids about climate change. I think those are great starter conversations to have, especially when kids are really young. So to start us off, what is climate change? It's something that's in the news. It's something that maybe we see on social media. but what really is climate change? When they're throwing that term around, what do they actually mean? And it actually has a lot of different implications. So essentially, it's a term that describes when sunlight reaches the Earth's surface and it creates a blanket where our heat cannot be released back into the atmosphere. So, and there's certain gases that create that blanket. And there's certain things that we do as humans inhabiting the Earth that increase those greenhouse gases. So water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are the key indicators, or the key elements that create that blanket. They've been increasing over time with more, and especially over more developed countries, because of the human activity that's going on there. So burning of fossil fuels in cars and factories, industrialization. We saw a huge uptick when that occurred. Farming techniques, so transitioning from very small family-owned farms to farming thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle in large production farms, and then having to deal with their waste, how that happens, and when it's so concentrated, it makes it even more difficult to deal with. So when those get trapped in our atmosphere and the heat can't leave, the things that are underneath it, underneath that blanket, tend to get warmer. So you may have noticed some things with our weather, especially that have been more noticeable as of recent years, where maybe summers are hotter, maybe we have hotter springs or winters, or the periods of warmer temperatures are longer. So we might have maybe 1 or 2 days of 90 degrees in the summertime, where now we have maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of those high temperatures. So why do warmer temperatures matter? I don't know about anyone else here, but I'm always cold. My fingers and hands are always cold. I don't mind if it's a little bit warmer. I don't have to wear as many layers. Well, the Earth doesn't really like that so much. So as the Earth gets warmer, it creates more problems. The ecosystems and the wildlife have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Change is not a good thing. It happens very, very slowly. So in order for plants and animals to adjust, it takes a really, really, really long time. So even though maybe we're saying it's only a degrees or 2 warmer, that can be very detrimental to some plants and animals that are only specific to a specific window of temperature, on where they grow and how they reproduce, those kinds of things. So many species of plants and animals have survived just for this particular climate that we live in. And smaller variations can definitely impact them. So quick changes are very detrimental to them. And we know that plants and animals are really important. Without plants growing, a lot of times animals will disappear. If a lot of the smaller animals that rely on smaller plants disappear, the larger animals disappear. So we're all connected. It doesn't matter. We will feel that impact at some point. So the other change in that atmosphere is the moisture that's in it, which can lead to more severe storms. So we are also seeing that a little bit more now, with rainfall events that are heavy downpours, where maybe historically they would have been slower showers that wouldn't be torrential like rains. Also that more moisture and then the drying and then heavy downpour, that's very stressful on plants. So typically plants want a consistent environment. So either they have evolved so that they can live in a dry climate or drier climate, so they don't require very much rain. And if they do get that, it stresses them and they die. or they're evolved to really enjoy a lot of water and being in a very humid and wet environment, and to have a period of time where it's super, super dry, that will also stress the plant and they will die. So it's a very delicate balance with which that they live in. So it also can impact growing seasons for plants. So if we're talking about agricultural crops, durations of hot or cold or wet or dry impact the crop growth and how much can be harvested. So it's very challenging for those crops to change so quickly. And then other impacts that we need to think about is ocean and water temperatures. So as the temperature in water increases, the micro biological organisms that small animals, fish in water rely on, they can get stressed. And if they disappear, the things that feed on them don't have anything. So it's really important with changing temperature. We also think about our oceans and our fresh water and how that impacts the plants and animals that live there. So we kind of have a general overview of, what climate change is and the impacts, the things that we might see. And then I always think about, well, what does it have to do with me? I don't live in the lake. I don't live in that particular space. So how is that going to affect my health? And there's a lot of different aspects that people may not think about that really do impact our health. It can be directly, it can be diseases that we encounter or that we're exposed to. It can be through disrupting food supplies, so things that we historically rely on as for food and nutrition, that those would not be there. Also just disrupting your well-being, mental health. And in this area, I think what this is really pointing to is about if we're having a lot of tornadoes and hurricanes and major stressful events, and not only is that stressful physically, but mentally on us being in a state of concern or worry, constantly being stressed. You think about blood pressure, you think about heart disease and stroke and those kinds of things, and that added stress is not helpful for any of those conditions. We're going to really talk about the top two relating to affecting health directly and then spreading disease. And in these two categories, we think about extreme heat, air pollution, extreme weather, and then diseases spread by insects, ticks, rodents, contaminated water, and contaminated food. I'm not really going to focus a ton on the hunger, malnutrition, and mental illness, but those are also impacts directly to our health as well. So I'm going to break it out into a couple different categories here. The first one related to extreme heat. So again, those rising temperatures, because the gases can't leave our atmosphere, can lead to more places on Earth being hotter longer. So we're seeing higher temperatures than we've ever seen before in places on Earth that are already hot. But also seeing those temperatures hotter temperatures in places that have never experienced heat before. And the people that are most impacted in those places are outdoor workers, student athletes, people in cities. And the reason that they're a little bit more at risk is because when you're in concrete where there's a lot of heat absorption and there's not a lot of places for that to go, the heat stays trapped. It's always warmer there than it is if you were out in the country. People without air conditioning, and I think about this especially in Western states where heat, they'd have a day here or there where it'd be very, very warm. Traditionally, they're not putting in air conditioning units or central air units. They're much more concerned about cold weather. But if we're going to have sustained periods of time where it's much hotter, I think about elderly people or people with underlying health conditions or on certain medications. heat can be very triggering, and they can be very sensitive to that when you have no place to escape if most of the homes and or buildings don't have air conditioning. People with chronic diseases like asthma, um, like heart disease, like diabetes, are at higher risk for dehydration, for stroke, heat stroke, um, because of the condition and also some of the medications that people are on to manage their condition. Pregnant women, older adults, and young children. Those are all people that we would be concerned about, or groups of people that we'd be concerned about when it's related to high or extreme heat. So another kind of category where we think about how is it affecting our health directly is air pollution. And we have been historically really fortunate in Wisconsin and in the Midwest in general that this has not really been a huge thing on the radar where it was on the news and it's a regular thing. Up until a couple of years ago when the wildfires of Canada were being pushed, the smoke that was generated from them was actually being pushed south. And we were directly impacted, and it definitely was something front and center for us. People that are more at risk related to air pollution and health impacts are people that have heart disease, respiratory conditions like asthma, COPD, and other chronic lung conditions. And what we saw then is that, we were limiting our time outdoors. We were trying to minimize the time that we were exposed. So spending a lot of time indoors and not getting that fresh air and that exercise, which we know is impactful to people's health. But there are places in the world and in the United States that air pollution has been a thing for a long time because of smog, because of industry that is located in highly populated areas where they have been exposed to this for a long, long period of time. So I think it's very interesting how because of the wildfires in Canada, that was something maybe not on our radar, but all of a sudden really kind of came to the forefront of why we should be concerned about air pollution and what it can actually do to impact our everyday life. I mean, there was concerts canceled, there was outdoor activities, games, those kinds of things that were canceled because of how much smoke was in the air. So other things that we think about with extreme weather, that increased frequency and severity of downpours or of severe thunderstorms. And those not only kind of health condition wise can be troublesome, but just to our physical safety. So thinking about flash floods where you could be trapped either in your car, roadways could be destroyed. So getting emergency medical vehicles into an area like ambulances and fire trucks and those kinds of things. People being displaced from their homes for long periods of time and not having that shelter. Also, the aftermath of having a flood in your home, especially if the materials have been waterlogged for a long period of time. You have mold growth, you have impacts to indoor air quality because of the mold growth. We also have impacts because our rain events are heavier and heavier. We also are seeing rising water tables. And this is a thing a little bit more specific to in Wisconsin because we are a very water rich state. And underground watersheds are changing just like surface water. And in one of our communities specifically, in the Nakusa area, the water table has risen so much that when they're building in that surrounding village, that we have to be mindful about not putting in basements, not putting in crawl spaces, because the water table has risen so much that they will be flooded with any major water event. So we don't want to put that infrastructure in if it's only going to become damaged. But the ground can only absorb so much. And then depending on what kind of ground you have, that limits how much water it can absorb as well. We live in Sand Pillow, it's giant sandbox, so like water goes right through. If we had clay, like over on the other side of the state a little bit more, that water wouldn't have any place to go. It stays stuck in that substance. So kind of that extreme weather, and more frequently, we've had maybe one tornado a summer, and now maybe we have tornadoes in November and December, which is really weird. The stress related to having to deal with those types of situations more often is also directly impacting or can directly impact. Kind of this other category of impacting our health is related to what we would be exposed to with ticks, insects, and other organisms in our environment that carry disease that we might have contact with that could spread the disease to humans. And this is something that we have ticks in Wisconsin and mosquitoes. That's a common thing. And what we're starting to see is that our climate is not the same as what it once was. We have species of ticks and mosquitoes that are overwintering here that historically could never do that because our winters used to be so cold. So those species could never really live this far north. Now, could they travel in on some tires or on wood or other things being transported here? Yes. But essentially, they couldn't reproduce. They couldn't live through all of their life cycles here because it was too cold in the winter. So that was a protective factor. And those species, I'm thinking of the Lone Star tick in particular, which never really was above about southern Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee. That is kind of where that tick is normally found. We're seeing the Lone Star tick start to creep into Wisconsin. It's actually been documented here and in western Wisconsin specifically. So they carry different diseases. So things that we may not be thinking about, also that doctors, if you're going in and like, hey, I've been having these symptoms and I'm not sure what's going on, they may not be thinking about those things either because they haven't had to historically. Lyme's disease is something that we've always, been concerned with here. It's carried in deer ticks, and we know that it's a species that's been here for a very, very long time. But we might not be thinking of some of these other diseases that are carried by other ticks and or mosquitoes. So people are at risk for this is anybody doing outdoor activities. So if you love to go out hiking in the woods, you love to do gardening, you love to go out and bike or to hunt, those kinds of things, anything outside, you could potentially be exposed to those. And then be at risk of those diseases. Another kind of way that we are directly impacted is through contaminated water. So when we have heavy rain events especially, we're really concerned with our wells. Most of the drinking water that most communities, most individual homes, rural individual homes, they have wells. And that comes from groundwater. So remember we were talking about how it can only absorb so much and we're seeing more. Those wells can be impacted by high or heavy downpours in rain. It can carry things from in the soil or on the surface of the soil into drinking water, which can then be consumed by people or pets. And that runoff a lot of times does carry contaminants that we aren't typically exposed to. We also think about runoff related to natural bodies of water, like places we would swim or beaches. So when we have heavy downpours and that runoff goes into that space, there's usually a lot of beach testing that goes on in the summertime. And what they're checking to see is how much of that contamination is getting into the beach water. And then it's not safe to swim in those spaces. People that are at most risk for contaminated water and illness related to contaminated water are children, the elderly, pregnant people, people in remote areas where maybe access to other water sources isn't available. So we don't have many options, but also people who are dependent on fish sustaining their diet. If the fish and the water that the fish are in are contaminated, the fish could become an issue as far as consumption. Kind of go along with the water is food. So contaminated food. So we think about contaminated food related to climate change. A lot of that is runoff in water. We're also seeing where foods that are grown in soil that has been contaminated, the fruits and vegetables can potentially take those not nutrients, but those organisms in as they're growing. So it's not problematic as long as you're planning on cooking them thoroughly. So fruits and vegetables, which may not always be the case. But those illnesses from bacteria and toxins, also thinking about if we have lots of power outages, how are we keeping food hot or cold to make sure that pathogens don't grow on them is really important. When we have a lot of extreme weather events happening and lack of power or power intermittent, we really worry about how that food is going to be stored or going to be kept within a safe temperature. And then just thinking about food being grown in places where the temperature is changing and either there isn't enough water or there's too much rainfall. I was kind of talking about plants adapt to that area. We may not be able to grow those particular fruits or vegetables in that area because the temperature and rain amount has changed so drastically. And vulnerable populations for food is very similar to water. It's usually young people, elderly, anyone with immunocompromised systems. They're at most risk for any foodborne illness out there. A little bit touch on the lack of growing season or shortened growing seasons. So thinking about agriculture and crop production, what that might look like, but also thinking about it in terms of things that we, I know I saw a flyer that went out about foraging, springtime foraging. And so that could be impacted, number one, like when you go. So if our springs are earlier, if typically those plants are not harvested until May or June, it might be March or April that those are harvested. It might be that the amount of that crop is decreased because the spring was too wet or too dry for that plant. So then that leads to, well, if we're depending on this for certain sustenance, like we wouldn't have that available to us. So it's both on the agricultural side, and then if you're going out foraging and harvesting as well, that you might not have access to those foods. And it really is a similar group that's more vulnerable: infants, young children, pregnant women. Rural communities are at more risk of having implications. And then I led a little bit into this, the mental health issues, just the amount of stress that these changes put on people. If you're under constant concern about tornadoes or floods, or checking on people because it's so hot out, you're worried that, you know, they might have issues with the heat. Also thinking about isolation, and we saw that during the pandemic about the mental health impacts of that isolation. It's a real thing. and being in situations where you might be cut off from other people if you have washed out roads, or if you can't go places, that there is real implications on our mental health related to that. And that also impacts our any other underlying chronic condition like diabetes, heart disease. They're all connected to one another. So what can Big We do? So thinking on a community level. So sorry I had all of the kind of impacts and the different categories that they could potentially be, but what are things at the community level that we can do to help mitigate those climate change impacts? And there's some things that we can do. Heat response planning and engineering. So when we're thinking about developing communities, this is something that we can keep in mind, and we do. Ensuring that we have cooling centers in our communities, that we have a canopy that is sufficient so that it would keep places cooler. So engineering those things into planning a community is part of the new way forward. That's what we need to do. Making sure that there's information available to people about high heat days. So sending out notices more frequently to get people prepared, having places for them to go, whether it's a library or a community center or an elder site, to get out of the heat, to escape those high heat days. Building and adapting infrastructure. So building, whether it's homes or commercial buildings, so that they're more efficient, they take less energy, to make them less carbon dependent. Those are all things that we can do at a community level in order to reduce our impacts on climate change. So keeping your home weatherized as much as you can, but also thinking of all the commercial buildings, keeping them, because they use substantially more energy than a home, an individual home. Encourage the purchase of fuel efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, but knowing how that electric energy is produced is also important. So those are things to think about when you're thinking about infrastructure and putting access into communities. Walking, biking, transportation. So thinking about alternative transportations other than just traditional cars. Thinking about mass transit, which is even more difficult when you're talking about rural communities. But how could we lean into that in a useful way to reduce our carbon footprint? So making sure that we have infrastructure that is not crumbling. So we're keeping up and we're putting in new, and we're not letting it deteriorate. We're doing the things to keep our infrastructure up to par. I think about our roads with higher heat days. Concrete needs to be made differently to withstand the higher heat days. We need to have larger storm drains, thinking about when we have heavy downpours, and those storm drains lead into containment areas that are larger, that can hold larger bodies of water when we have those heavy downpours. So those are infrastructure things at a community level that we can do to help mitigate the impacts of flooding, for example. Improve sanitation and water management. So making sure that we have backup systems in place for our water utilities, backup drinking water sources and delivery systems, so that our wells remain safe, that we would still have access to clean water at a community level. And also thinking about how to protect residential wells as well, and where we're placing them, so that if it's in a place where it floods routinely, that's probably not a good place to put that, and how can we locate that in a place that's going to be more protective in the future, so we can have access to safe drinking water. So that's the big we, which a little bit out of our individual kind of control, but what can we, the little we, or us individually, do that could potentially help mitigate those implications. So first, for heat, you can check on family. You can ask neighbors, especially elderly neighbors, how they're doing, keeping tabs on them, going to cooling centers, staying hydrated, maintaining air conditioners or systems at home, and have backup plans. So making sure that if the air conditioning fails, that you have fans, you have things that can keep you cool, if that would fail. Also thinking about how you can create a property or a space that has natural air conditioning. So trees are really important for that. So planting trees near and adjacent to a property to ensure that they have proper cover. We can monitor air quality. We can do that in a couple different ways. There are some wonderful apps out there that can monitor air quality and tell you if it's poor air quality days. We got very used to that during the when the wildfires were happening. It'll tell you when ozone levels are very high, when pollen counts are very high. Then you can adjust the things that you do. So especially if you have asthma or heart disease or COPD, you may want to stay inside during those peak times of the day, so you can make decisions about what you want to do. You can also make sure that you have all of your medications that you need, whether it's an inhaler or if you take regular medications every day, making sure that you have access to them, that you don't run out. You can move the times of events. So during that time when we have wildfires, they shifted games, whether it was soccer or baseball, to different parts of the day where it wasn't as impactful. It's also important that you keep your furnace filter changed and cleaned. So doing that routinely, check with your what's on your furnace. It'll tell you if they're monthly or quarterly, if you can rewash them or you have to get disposable ones, it'll tell you. But keeping those clean will help collect any of those things from the air coming into your home. For floods, if you do experience a flood, it's really important that you clean and dry those areas right away, and watch and monitor for mold growth. If you do happen to see mold growing, if you know that the water is gone, it's just started to grow, you can use like Dawn dish soap to clean that area, and you have to continue to monitor it and keep it dry. The big thing for that is just dry, dry, dry. But thinking about for flooding and for other emergencies, having that emergency kit ready to go, that would have all the things that you would need if you needed to access something in an emergency or in a hurry. Things like batteries, light, flashlights, medication, water, a first aid kit, very basic things. Could be really, really helpful in any type of emergency. And then we think of being exposed to insects or ticks in our environment. There's definitely things that we can do to protect ourselves. We still want to go out and enjoy nature. We still want to be out in it, but we have to be thinking about the repellent that we're using. There's lots of different products out there. It doesn't necessarily have to have DEET in it to be effective. So thinking about eucalyptus and lemon oil as natural repellents. But using them, wearing long sleeves, long pants, doing tick checks on yourself, your children, pets. So just being mindful of when you're out there and then you come back in to check yourself and anyone else for ticks. Any long grass that you might have, keeping grass cut short next to a property can help keep ticks at bay. It can also help with mosquitoes as well. So, climate change and climate impacts and on our health are big. And I acknowledge that it's a really big thing, and it can seem very overwhelming even as adults. And one area I think about is if we're having these conversations with kids early, one, they have a really wonderful knack of problem solving, so they can do something, they can be empowered to do something. And two, it's really going to impact them even more so than the people that are currently adults. They're the ones that are going to live with the implications of a changing climate. So that's why I think it's really important to have those conversations with kids. And when it comes up on social media or it comes up on TV or they hear about it in school, to really encourage those conversations and what they think it is and why they think it's important or not important. So I was really thinking about that, and especially the younger age, how as a caregiver can we start those conversations? How do we bring it up to the littlest of us? And I started doing some digging, and I found a couple of really cool resources. But I know at school, like Earth Day, they have special projects that they might do or bring home worksheets or stories. And so keeping those conversations going and practical things that they can do at home. So there's very simple things like recycling, talking about recycling and what it actually means. Practicing that, like, oh, glass goes over here, cans go over here, and why we're doing that. When we go get groceries, we use a reusable bag. We don't get plastic bags. We use reusable water bottles. We don't just buy bottled water. We can reuse the water bottles that we have. So all of those are simple everyday things that we can do where we're really trying to help impact climate change and mitigate the impacts that we're seeing. Do hands-on activities. So planting a garden, planting trees. With the planting the garden, it's really, I think, helpful to have them kind of pick out the plants they want and really get into being able to harvest those and try them themselves, where if you just went and got them for them and potentially they haven't really wanted to try new things, if they grow it and they see it and they harvest it, they might be a little bit more apt to at least try it. So that's something fun and very easy to do. Composting is another activity. So taking all of those scraps from cooking and keeping it in a compost pile that then feeds your garden so that you can grow plants. I think that's a very easy hands-on thing. There are also other resources to start conversations. So when I was kind of looking for curriculum or activities, I ran into a wonderful resource, and it's called Susie Hicks, the Climate Chick. So I have a link to the website and her YouTube videos. She has a wonderful set of curriculum that it can be taught, and the age range for this is about 3 to 8 years old. And it has games, it has coloring sheets, it has a whole curriculum. So if you were in a Head Start age group, you could do those activities within a group, or you could do it at home. One of the games I thought that was ingenious was Renewable I Spy. So I know we do I Spy when we're traveling in the car on lots of different topics, and this is just another one that you could do if you're looking around and paying attention. So this is super cute. It's got a Muppet. It's a little bit like Sesame Street, and it's pretty cute. So I'm gonna try to play this. And if it doesn't work, Renelle,
Did you click the black box?
I did. Does it take a minute?
I don't have a good answer.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm trying. Technical difficulties. Hold on.
As always.
Hmm. Well, it worked when I practiced this.
Do you want to try to go back to the other slide and open the web browser?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to try here.
You'll have to stop sharing and then reshare once you open your web browser. And then remember to click the sound button too, so we can hear it.
So stop sharing. Okay. And I'm going to take this, copy.
Pam made me watch this with her, so I promise it's worth the wait. It is the cutest thing.
Okay, all right, here we go. Now I can get to it. Hold on 1 second. Yes. No. Okay. All right, so back to this. That. And Google, share. Okay. I'm going to make this bigger. And where is the volume thing again?
Just try to play and we'll see how the volume is.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can you guys hear it?
Yep.
A greenhouse is a place that helps plants grow by trapping the heat from the sun. The glass ceiling lets the sun's rays in, but because it's all closed up, it doesn't let any of the heat out.
Yuck, that sounds sweaty.
Our atmosphere is like one big greenhouse. And inside it are tiny particles called greenhouse gases that also trap the heat from the sun. Two of the main greenhouse gases are methane and carbon dioxide, or CO2 for short.
CO2. CO2.
So, now we know that there are gases in the atmosphere that trap heat, right?
Just like a greenhouse. Does that mean?
Oh, it means
Super climate science time!
now that we know what greenhouse gases are, let's figure out what they have to do with climate change. Normally, there's only a teensy-weensy amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, making up less than 1% of the whole thing.
Because our atmosphere is just right. Right?
Well,
Wait, you only make that face when you're about to tell me something I'm not gonna like. What is wrong with our atmosphere? Huh?
okay. Right now, humans are powering the ways that we work, eat, and live with things called fossil fuels, which create a lot of greenhouse gases like methane and CO2. Those gases travel upwards and make our atmospheric blanket thicker and thicker.
Wait, if CO2 traps heat in the atmosphere like a greenhouse, then won't adding more CO2 trap more heat?
Bingo. Because of this, Earth is getting hotter and weird stuff is starting to happen all over the place.
So is it gonna be hot like summer all the time now? I like summer, but sometimes it gets too hot and I start to feel all wilty.
Well, climate change works differently depending on where you live. Some places are experiencing a lot more storms. Some places are getting hit by droughts and wildfires. And some colder places are starting to feel not so cold anymore. Even the oceans are changing.
What does that mean for us?
Well, overall, life is getting harder for plants and animals, including people, all over the world.
But I'm a plant. I don't want life to get harder for me.
Me either. That's why right now we're learning to change the ways that we work, eat, and live to stop adding so much CO2 into the atmosphere. It's important to remember that solutions are everywhere. Right, Sprout? I'll be right back. It seems like we need a little bit of Susie-splaining. Wow, that was a lot. Right now, Sprout is feeling some really big feelings about climate change, which is totally understandable. I remember the first time that I learned about climate change, I also felt sad and scared and overwhelmed. It is totally normal and okay to feel those things. Now, let's go check on Sprout, shall we? I think she could use a little bit of love. Join us next time as we explore our feelings about climate change. But before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel to keep up with our adventures.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch
Definitely
back.
worth the wait.
It is super cute. They have little videos. They're all short like this, so some of them get up to like 8 minutes, but most of them are pretty short because they are really focused on really little people, and they won't sit for real long periods of time. So I strongly recommend if you're looking at starting some of those conversations. It's also great for adults. It's super entertaining. It makes the content very accessible. So I totally recommend that. Okay, I gotta share. I'll share back my PowerPoint. I know, way boring, right? Okay, now we're sharing PowerPoint. Boring. Okay, so really quick, I know we're getting close to the end of the hour here, but so I want to touch base a little bit on some of the programs in environmental health. We did a little audit or inventory of the different programs that we do where we're really doing climate health work. So emergency preparedness plans. So this is something that we work on every single year. We go through our plans and make sure that we are able to function as a health department. If there would be an emergency, that we are able to assist as best we can our community, and then also providing resources to community members on having home emergency preparedness kits. So thinking about those activities that we do, that's all to try to mitigate those implications of having extreme weather, primarily. We do our own air monitoring stations. So we have 2 air monitoring stations in the Toma and Black River areas that collect data just like the Wisconsin DNR. We analyze that data. We have had baseline data for 10 years now. And the really important thing about our air monitoring data is it's defensible in court. So if there would be somebody that is polluting and that we can do that, we could actually take our data to court and it would stand up. It has all of the same requirements that an EPA or Wisconsin DNR has to follow. So that's really important. We do invasive species and endangered species assessment. We do that in a lot of different places, specific to when we want to do community development. So before we're going to build out a piece of property or purchase a piece of property, this is something that our department will come in and do and take a look. One of those is like Karner blue butterflies in the Jackson County area. Vector-borne and insect surveillance. So this is something that we partner with other entities to do surveillance of mosquitoes and ticks in our area. So we have access to that data to see what the prevalence, what species, and how dense that's occurring. We do utilities infrastructure projects. So some of those have included adding backup generators, solar power, increased drainage and those kinds of things, capacity, so we can deal with larger rainfalls better. So those are all infrastructure projects through our utility programs. Food safety information. So this is something through the block parties, through our facility inspections. We're always sharing information about food safety and how foods can be stored safely. Sharing information about shelf-stable foods that don't require refrigeration and how they can be used. Mold investigations is another thing that we're able to help tribal members with. Just identifying if that in fact is mold growing in your home and how much and where and why it might be happening. So we can give some information about that. We've also had response to PFAS in the communities where this has been an issue, where there's been contamination to community systems and or wells by providing reverse osmosis systems in their homes. In other areas, it's not PFAS, it's been nitrate exposure. So doing reverse osmosis, that gets the tiniest molecules out of the water so that it can be safe for consumption. And then wildfire and indoor air response. So those are some things that we've done with having HEPA filters and providing those filtration systems or access for people who are impacted by those things. So it's just a touch of the different things in the environmental health program that we're helping with. And then also thinking about in the invasive species and endangered species, we do prairie restoration is one of the things that our program has done, and helping to preserve those natural spaces so that the plants and animals that have always resided there can continue to reside there or bring them back. Because in some of the places the tribe has purchased properties where we restored them back to what they were, and then the plants and animals will come back and stay. And that's kind of the intention and the hope for what we're doing. So this is just a touch of all of the wonderful work that's being done. So, and with that, I am all done.
Finish just 1 minute there.
Sorry.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Kinagigi, thank you, Pam. It's such amazing work that you and the rest of the environmental health team do to protect our communities and our people. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available on the Department of Health website under the Public Health tab and on our Facebook page. We look forward to seeing you at our next session, which I believe is June 11th, the second Wednesday in June. We will be having our summer block party kickoff on June 4th. We'll be at Wittenberg at the SIG Funmaker Community Center. We hope to see you there. If anyone has any questions for Pam, I did put her email in the chat. I've also put Jamie and my email in there. We welcome all feedback related to this series. If there's something that you would like to learn more about, or if you would like to present on a topic, please reach out to us. Well, thank you everyone for coming and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.